Africa Today News, New York Weekly News Roundup. Wars, crackdowns, and power plays. It was a week where the world's fault lines were on full display here on ATN Weekly News Roundup. Headlines. Global military spending hit a record $2.89 trillion even as U.S. defense outlays fell. UAE walked away from OPEC after nearly 60 years. Former FBI Director Comey was indicted over an Instagram post targeting Trump. Iranian Nobel laureate Narges Mohammadi was rushed to hospital from prison. Remains of a World War II soldier from Brooklyn came home after 80 years. Chad arrested 9 opposition leaders ahead of a banned protest. Mali's Tuareg rebels demanded Russian fighters leave the country. At least 17 migrants died after their boat drifted for 8 days off Libya. A man was sentenced to death for stabbing 4 toddlers at a Ugandan nursery. Barcelona's Hansi Flick agreed to a contract extension. International news. The world spent more on its militaries last year than at any point since the Cold War era. A report from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute put global defense expenditure at $2.89 trillion in 2025, up 2.9% and rising for the 11th straight year. Defense spending as a share of global GDP climbed to 2.5%, a level not seen since 2009. The one notable exception was the United States, where outlays dropped 7.5% after President Trump froze new military aid to Ukraine. The United Arab Emirates formally left OPEC this week after nearly 6 decades of membership. Abu Dhabi's departure freed it from the production quotas the cartel and its allies imposed to manage global oil supply. The UAE is OPEC's 4th largest producer, and its exit weakened the group's grip on pricing. But delegates and analysts said the remaining members of the alliance intended to hold together and continue coordinating output policy. A federal grand jury in North Carolina indicted former FBI Director James Comey on 2 counts of threatening to harm President Trump. The charges stemmed from an Instagram post on May 15th in which Comey shared an image bearing the numbers 8647. Prosecutors argued a reasonable person familiar with the context would interpret the post as a serious threat against the president. Comey, who is 65, faced 1 count under the statute covering threats against the president, and a second for transmitting a threatening communication across state lines. Iranian Nobel Peace Prize laureate Narges Mohammadi was transferred from prison to a hospital after her health sharply deteriorated. Her foundation said she had suffered 2 episodes of complete loss of consciousness and a severe cardiac crisis. Mohammadi, who won the Nobel in 2023 for her human rights work, had been held at a prison in the northwestern city of Zanjan. She was believed to have suffered a heart attack in late March, and lawyers who visited her at the time described her as pale, underweight, and unable to walk without assistance. And a long chapter finally closed for one Brooklyn family. The remains of Air Force Staff Sergeant Nicholas Governale were returned to the United States more than 80 years after he was killed in a crash off the Solomon Islands in July 1943, just 10 days before his 23rd birthday. His nephew, Anthony Veneziano, said the family had carried the loss for generations. "It was a chapter that was never closed," he said. "There was always the hope because they never found him." Africa and Nigeria. Authorities in Chad arrested 9 leaders of the opposition GCAP movement ahead of a protest march they had called for May 2nd. The detentions took place on Saturday, and the leaders remained in police custody as of Sunday morning, according to a GCAP spokesman. The government had already declared a ban on the planned rally. President Mohamed Idris Deby Itno, who seized power in a 2021 military takeover, has faced growing pressure from opposition groups demanding a return to democratic governance. Mali's Tuareg rebels declared this week that they wanted Russia's Africa Corps expelled from the country. Mohammed El Maouloud Ramadane, a spokesman for the Azawad Liberation Front, told reporters during a visit to Paris that his movement had no quarrel with Russia itself, only with the military government in Bamako that Moscow backs. Russian fighters had supported President Assimi Goïta's regime as it came under coordinated assault from an alliance of Tuareg separatists, Fulani and Arab rebels, and al-Qaeda-linked groups who pushed into the capital and seized several northern and central cities. At least 17 migrants perished, and 9 more were feared dead after their boat broke down and drifted for 8 days in the Mediterranean off eastern Libya. The Libyan Red Crescent said volunteers working alongside naval and Coast Guard forces rescued 7 survivors near Tobruk, close to the Egyptian border. Security sources expected the bodies of the missing to wash ashore in the coming days. Libya remains one of the main transit corridors for migrants, many from sub-Saharan Africa, who risk desert and sea crossings to reach Europe. A Ugandan court sentenced a man to death by hanging for the murder of 4 toddlers at a nursery school in Kampala. Christopher Okello Onyem, 38, entered the GABA Early Childhood Development Program on April 2nd and fatally stabbed 4 children, all between 1 and 2 years old. Onyem, who holds both Ugandan and U.S. citizenship, had 14 days to appeal. Uganda has not carried out an execution since 2005, though capital punishment remains on the books. Sports and culture. Barcelona moved to lock down their managerial future. Reports emerged that head coach Hansi Flick had approved the terms of a contract extension that would keep him at the club beyond his current deal, which runs through 2027. Club president Joan Laporta had initially pushed for a longer arrangement stretching to 2029. The early move reflected Barcelona's desire to avoid any uncertainty around the dugout after a season in which Flick steadied the ship following a turbulent few years at the Camp Nou. That's where we leave it for this week. Join us again next weekend for the stories shaping the world, Africa, and Nigeria. It's been Africa Today News, New York.